lately.
Kelsey, what has Steph meant to this group and her the other night? And
it kind of threw me for a loop too. I told her to her face, I said, Coach, this is for you. In terms of just a sense of confidence, a sense of awareness of that you're not alone. And if anybody know me, it's like I don't play that. So it's like it really hurt my feelings to see her kind of like have emotions in terms of like not feeling valued and not feeling wanted in a place where she has to coach. At the end of the day, this is her job. And so, she has to show up too. And I think that people don't really recognize that. And I think that it's our job to remind her. It's our cultures. It's our culture. And I think we have to remind her that our culture is not.
That right there is the part people cannot just brush aside. Kelsey Mitchell did not sound like somebody reading from a team-approved statement. She said Stephanie White felt unwanted. She said it hurt her feelings to see it, and then she made this personal. I don't play that. So now the question gets a lot more interesting. Is this really just fans versus Stephanie White, or are we watching the Fever locker room draw a line around their coach?
What she needs to do, so I'm really proud of her.
Aliyah, after the last game, Kaylin and Sophie said they really wanted to win for Steph. Kaylin said it made her sick to hear the booze before the game. Yeah. What were your emotions like as a face on it?
Yeah, the same way, honestly. I think when you are on your home floor and your team's getting announced and the coach is getting announced, I feel like there's no reason for any of that. I mean, we come out here and we do everything that we can to win. And I think Steph does a great job with us. Like, we love her and we appreciate her. And so to hear that, it was really annoying.
And Aliyah Boston is clearly on the same side of the argument, even if her delivery is calmer. She called the booing annoying and disrespectful, said the players love Stephanie White, and tied that support directly to winning. That matters because once multiple players start speaking publicly, this stops being only a coaching controversy. It becomes a locker room story. But there is another layer here that I think is much more important than whether Boston or Mitchell personally likes their coach. Later, listen closely to what Mitchell says about the culture inside this team, because that may explain why the players are defending White so aggressively even while a portion of the fan base remains furious with her.
So we're going to come out here and we're going to get that dub.
You guys talked about at times how outside noise makes you closer as a group. What role has Steph played in that?
Yeah, I mean, even from the beginning of the season, she just talked about closing the fist. Through everything, no matter what, no matter the background noise, just close the fist, continue to stay together, and that's really our approach every single day we step on that floor, and even when we're in practice too. So, I mean, that's just the example that we have, and so...
Boston keeps coming back to one phrase: close the fist. Ignore the outside noise. Stay connected. Keep everybody moving in the same direction. From a team-building perspective, that is exactly what you would expect a coach to preach when criticism gets loud. Players cannot spend every practice debating talk radio, social media, boos from the stands, and whatever controversy is trending that afternoon. They still have games to play, but there is a tension inside that philosophy. Block out the noise works when the noise is meaningless. It gets more complicated when the noise is coming from your own paying supporters, and when those supporters believe they have a legitimate complaint about the way the coach handled a public controversy. You can tell players not to let criticism affect their preparation. You cannot make the criticism disappear just by calling it outside noise, and that is where this story has become fascinating. Boston is explaining why the locker room is closing ranks. The fans who are upset are asking an entirely different question, whether closing ranks answers the criticism at all.
It's clear to me, and it should be clear to you guys, that the Indiana Fever is stepping into this whole situation to try to, I'm going to just assume, this is all my assumption, they're stepping in to try to help Stephanie White public image because they possibly is about to let her go next year. But one thing that she cannot get rid of is her time at Vanderbilt. Yes, the Vanderbilt stick, the locker room drama, that was her baggage that came with Stephanie White.
Now, the original commentator goes much further and speculates that the Fever organization itself may be trying to repair Stephanie White's public image because it could eventually move on from her. There is no evidence in this transcript establishing that. That is speculation, and it should be treated as speculation. The Vanderbilt reference also gets thrown into the conversation, as if past locker room drama automatically proves something about the present. It does not. Historical criticism can be relevant if you can draw a documented line between two situations, but similarity is not proof. If we are going to judge what is happening with Indiana right now, the strongest evidence is what the current players are actually saying, what the team is doing on the floor, and how White has publicly handled the controversy that triggered this backlash. And so far, the current players are not describing a fractured locker room. They are doing almost the opposite. They are publicly defending the coach. That does not settle whether fans are justified in criticizing her, but it does kill one easy narrative, the idea that visible fan anger automatically means the players have turned on Stephanie White too.
I just was aware of the streaks and the numbers a little bit on TV the other day. So this is kind of new for me, but try to keep the main thing, man, for real. Sophie just asked me, she was like, I was like, I don't know. I just, you just show up, you play, you try to do the right thing, and you just let it flow. And that's a genuine response, man, because I can't tell you any other.
Kelsey Mitchell's answer here is revealing for another reason. She sounds almost allergic to making the story bigger than basketball. She says she only became aware of the broader situation recently, goes straight back to keep the main thing, and basically describes her approach as showing up, playing, and letting everything else flow. That is veteran behavior. Mitchell has been around long enough to know that public storms can consume a season if the locker room starts feeding them every day. But notice the contrast. On general outside noise, she wants distance. When the subject becomes White personally feeling unsupported, Mitchell suddenly becomes much more emotional. That tells you there is a difference between ignoring criticism and ignoring somebody you believe is being hurt by it. Mitchell appears willing to do the first. She is clearly not willing to do the second, and this is where some viewers are going to disagree with her. A fan can say, I respect Kelsey Mitchell, but my ticket does not obligate me to approve of the coach. That is a fair position. Players are allowed to love their coach. Fans are allowed to dislike that coach's decisions. Those two things can exist at the same time without either side being fake. The trouble begins when either side treats the other as illegitimate.
Yeah, I think the craziest part for me is I feel like there's another gear that I could tap into. And that's just where my standard is. There's so much more film to watch and so much more work to kind of put in, but I take pride in how I get my work done, and how I get to my spots on the floor. And so a lot of the success I've had this year is just really taking that focus serious about making sure I find my spots on the floor and be confident.
And then Mitchell immediately reminds everybody why her voice carries weight in that locker room. She is not somebody sitting at the end of the bench giving a ceremonial defense of the coach. She is talking about another level in her game, about film study, conditioning, getting to her spots, and holding herself to a higher standard even during one of the strongest stretches of her career. That matters because leadership is not just who talks the loudest at a press conference. It is who has credibility when the doors close. Mitchell's credibility comes from work and production. So when she tells White, Coach, this is for you, teammates are going to hear that differently than they would hear it from somebody with no standing inside the room. That is why the fan-coach battle is unlikely to force the players away from White in the short term. If anything, public hostility can create the opposite effect. A locker room that already believes outsiders misunderstand it can become more protective, more unified, and more determined to prove people wrong. Ironically, booing the coach may strengthen the emotional bond between that coach and the players.
This offense is on track to be the most high-scoring offense in the entire history of the WNBA.
Yeah.
What do you feel like as a unit you guys have been able to accomplish together?
I think the ability to see the next person be great is it's like floating in our locker room in a lot of positive ways. I think that if there's somebody with a hot hand, you want to make sure they get the ball all the way to the point where if there's a mismatch, you want to make sure we evaluate that mismatch. And I think that we've been having a lot of experience throughout the course of this year to kind of learn those things. And I think that we only get better. And I think that our chemistry and our ability to want to gel is real. I don't think that's a fake, and I think that that's...
And now we get to the basketball evidence, because this part cannot be ignored just because the controversy is louder. Mitchell describes an offense where players genuinely want the next person to succeed. She talks about feeding the hot hand, identifying mismatches, learning from experience, and a chemistry that she insists is real. That is important. One of the easiest attacks against a controversial coach is to say the team has stopped responding. But if players are describing improved chemistry while the offense is functioning at a historic pace, then the argument against White cannot simply be, the team is falling apart. You need a more precise criticism. Maybe you dislike a rotation. Maybe you think timeout management has been poor in certain games. Maybe you disagree with how she publicly defended or contextualized a physical play involving an opponent. Maybe you think she has mishandled communication with the fan base. Fine. Those are actual basketball or leadership arguments. But if the players are producing, connecting, defending each other publicly, and describing a healthy internal culture, then anybody demanding a firing has to deal with that evidence too. This is the part where the story splits in two. One side is judging White primarily by the controversy. The locker room appears to be judging her by the totality of their daily experience with her. Those are completely different data sets.
And the way she's playing.
Yeah, Kelsey comes in here and she works every day. I mean, she gets up extra shots. She just comes in and does what she needs to do. And I think, honestly, she's really just the MVP. Like, I think that's just what she's been doing. Every single night you see her come out and she drops, I don't even know how many points at this rate. She defends her butt off, and then we just come out here and we...
Boston calling Kelsey Mitchell really just MVP gives us another glimpse into that internal dynamic. Listen to the way these players talk about one another. There is admiration there. Boston mentions the extra shots, the work ethic, the scoring, the defense. This is not the language of a group spending all day consumed by internal resentment. And that is why I would be careful with any claim that Indiana is secretly collapsing behind the scenes, unless actual evidence emerges. Public controversy is real. Fan dissatisfaction is real. Stephanie White being booed is real, but none of those facts automatically equal a dysfunctional locker room. In fact, based on these interviews, the opposite case is stronger right now. Adversity is becoming a rallying point. That can be powerful, but it can also become dangerous if the group starts treating every outside criticism as an attack. Great teams need internal unity without creating an information bubble. Sometimes fans are wrong. Sometimes media narratives are ridiculous. Sometimes critics spot something real. The healthiest locker rooms know the difference, and that distinction could determine whether this support for White becomes a strength or a blind spot.
Knows that.
You had Gary as an assistant in 2022.
Yeah.
What's it like having him back right now?
I love Klopp. Klopp is like our secret sauce, man. Klopp is like, I mean, seriously, the success that Seattle had in those times was because of people like Klopp, and I think that even though he's silent and just walk around while people really know who he is, he has the brains out this world. Defensively, he just wants us to be great, and I think that everything that he's experienced with Seattle and winning championships, I think that he's actually pointing to us and just in so many, like, I don't know, weird, but like original ways. And he's really good at what he does.
He's still quiet, just sits out to the
side.
side.
just kind of seeping through throughout the course of the practice, but you'll never really hear him unless he...
Then Mitchell starts praising assistant coach Gary Kloppenberg, and this is where the conversation quietly gives us a deeper picture of how the Fever staff is functioning. She calls him their secret sauce, praises his defensive mind, references the championship experience he brought from Seattle, and says when he finally speaks, players listen. That tells you White is not operating alone. Coaching staffs are ecosystems. Head coaches set the identity, but assistants handle scouting, defensive schemes, player development, matchup adjustments, communication film, and 100 details fans never see. If Indiana's defense is improving and players are openly crediting assistants for helping them understand positioning and execution, that matters when evaluating the entire staff. It also complicates the simplistic version of the story where one person gets every ounce of credit or blame. A head coach absolutely owns major decisions. That is part of the job. But if you are trying to decide whether the Fever should make a coaching change, you have to ask what would actually be disrupted. Systems get disrupted. Relationships get disrupted. Assistant roles can change. Terminology changes. Defensive rules change. Player responsibilities change. Sometimes that disruption is necessary. Sometimes it is exactly how a team jumps another level. But you better know what problem you are solving before you blow up something that the players believe is working.
And sort of progress over the season?
Yeah, I think it's gotten better game by game. I think we still have some times where we kind of go on little lapses of not doing what we're supposed to be doing or being in the right spots, but I think that's just kind of just the ebbs and flow of a basketball game. But I think for the most part, we have really been where we needed to be. We've been in the positions, we've been aggressive, we've been active, and that's really all that we can do, and just continue to force teams into taking tough shots.
How much of that is improvement from earlier in the year? I mean,
yeah.
Would you say it's a lot, a little? Or?
I think it's been great improvement, honestly. We come in here and we drill it a lot, just making sure that we're in our right spots based on teams and what we expect them to do. So I think, honestly, as we continue to work on it, it's just going to continue to get better. But obviously,
Boston's earlier explanation of the defense fits perfectly with that. She says there are still lapses, but she also says the team is more aggressive, more active, more disciplined about getting to the right spots, and substantially improved from the beginning of the season. That is the type of comment that actually helps us evaluate coaching because it is specific. She is not just saying, "Coach is amazing." She is talking about drilling positioning, scouting expected actions, forcing opponents into difficult shots, and learning where defenders need to be. So now we can finally get closer to the central issue. Why are the players defending Stephanie White this hard? It is probably not because somebody from the front office handed everybody the same talking points. Nothing in these interviews proves that. The more obvious explanation is that the players believe the coaching staff has contributed to their improvement. They feel personally supported inside the building, and they view the public reaction as disconnected from the day-to-day reality they experience. That does not mean the fans have to agree. It means the disagreement is more fundamental than people realize. Fans are often evaluating moments. Players are evaluating relationships. A supporter in the stands remembers the press conference quote that made them furious. A player remembers hundreds of practices, film sessions, conversations, game plans, adjustments, and private moments nobody outside the organization saw. Neither perspective automatically cancels the other.
Listen, you listen.
Kelsey, on the defensive side, not talking about as much
Yeah.
as all the scoring, but it seems like you really at times have locked down some of the most elite guards.
Oh, I appreciate
in
it.
the league. I guess, how do you feel like you've also made strides there?
I think that what I did learn over the course of my years is that defense can fuel a lot of your offensive wants. The things that you want offensively comes from getting defensive stops. And so I just started to take it to account. Like, wow, if I could get one more deflection, if I get one more steal, you get a chance to go be you on the offensive side of things. But really and honestly, I'm a competitor. And so when Steph and BJ feels like I can do certain things and I could take certain defensive challenges, I think that they know that I'm not going to turn them down. I also think that my ability to want to play offense also is my ability to want to play defense.
Mitchell's comments on defense make that even clearer. She says Stephanie White and VJ put her in situations where they believe she can accept difficult defensive assignments, and Mitchell takes pride in answering that challenge. She connects defense to offense, talks about deflections and steals fueling her game, and describes herself as a competitor who will not turn those assignments down. That is coaching trust. When a player believes a coach sees more in her than the public does, that relationship gets strong very quickly. White is apparently asking Mitchell to contribute beyond scoring, and Mitchell sees that not as a burden, but as proof that the staff trusts her. Now imagine that from Mitchell's perspective. She has a coach challenging her, empowering her, giving her responsibility, and helping create a system in which she believes the team can thrive. Then she walks onto the home floor and hears that coach booed. You do not have to agree with Mitchell's reaction to understand it, but this is also where the players need to understand the other half. Fans are not inside those meetings. Their relationship with the team is built through what they see publicly: results, effort, accountability, communication, and major decisions. If a coach says something they believe minimizes a dangerous or unacceptable play, they are going to react to the public statement because that is the evidence available to them. That gap between private trust and public perception is the real crisis here, not race. Not some imaginary locker room civil war. not an unverified conspiracy about the organization secretly preparing to fire somebody. Trust versus perception. And unless somebody closes that gap, every future controversy is going to reopen the same wound.
I guess, is there a point where she went from teammate to friend, a turning point that kind of...
I think it was always like that. I just think that as you kind of like have experiences with each other, you sit on a plane together and you walk on a bus together and you walk in a hotel together, and those interactions are, that they're stepping stones, and you build and you constantly connect. And I think that connection for me and Cece is it's genuine. I think that the more and more you get to know who a person is, and you know what they bring to the table, and you don't judge.
That was a great question.
The one thing about Cece and her career is that people have already been judging her, and she's just really getting started. And so my job is to not be that person. If I can pour in different ways, and like I said, I always fill in the gaps for her because of what she does and how she does it, and the eyes and ears of all the people, it's the only thing that...
And listen to how Mitchell talks about Caitlin Clark. She describes the friendship developing through ordinary shared experiences, planes, buses, hotels, time together, learning who somebody really is. Then she says something important about Clark's career. People have already been judging her even though she is just getting started. And Mitchell sees part of her own role as filling the gaps and being a steady presence. That matters far beyond Clark. Mitchell is basically describing the philosophy of this locker room. Protect your people. Support them when the outside pressure gets intense. Do not become another voice piling onto somebody who is already carrying enormous attention. Once you understand that, Mitchell's defense of White makes perfect sense. The same instinct she applies to Clark appears to be the instinct she applies to her coach. She does not want the locker room participating in somebody else's public destruction. That is admirable as a teammate. The question is whether loyalty ever becomes too automatic, because professional sports are brutal. Coaches get judged, players get judged, executives get judged. Fans are not required to suspend criticism because the team views itself as a family. The strongest cultures are not the ones where nobody is questioned. They are the ones where criticism can exist without destroying trust. Indiana now has to prove it has that kind of culture.
Kelsey, you have moments in games where you might not have the best play, and the next play you'll do something crazy good. Mm-hmm. How do you just continue to have this mentality of maybe that play ain't gonna stick with me? And did you always have that as a youngin'?
No. I think that was being a pro. I think that's something I had to learn. If this was 3 or 4 years ago, I probably would have, collectively had 4 or 5 bad plays in a row. I just think that over time we just try to figure out ways to move on, and that's where my mindset of my career is. Right.
Mitchell talks here about learning to move to the next play instead of allowing one mistake to become 4 or 5 bad possessions in a row. That might be the most useful metaphor for the entire Fever situation. Can this organization move to the next play? Can Stephanie White acknowledge when public communication creates unnecessary backlash without treating every critic like background noise? Can fans criticize her decisions without turning every loss, every substitution, and every quote into proof that she is unfit for the job? Can players defend a coach they genuinely care about without implying supporters have no right to boo? Because if everybody stays trapped in the previous possession, this thing becomes exhausting. The basketball gets swallowed by a permanent argument over who disrespected whom. And there are legitimate basketball questions to answer. Indiana has ambitions bigger than simply surviving controversy. This team has stars, expectations, attention, and a fan base that has become emotionally invested in every decision. That means White's job is not only to hold the locker room together, it is to maximize the roster under enormous scrutiny. Player loyalty is one piece of that evaluation. It is not the entire evaluation.
But dang! Where the part at?
The players that they have on their roster are really, really great basketball players, and I don't think that's changed. I just think that now that we have a little bit more experience, you can maintain certain fallouts that we have from the first game to now. I like to think that we took that loss serious, but more importantly, over the course of the season, as you grow for the right reasons, and I think and I hope that we can do that and just kind of...
Mitchell's answer about Dallas tells you where the players want their attention. She talks about growth, experience, learning from the first matchup, understanding an opponent's roster, and correcting what went wrong before. That is professional basketball. That is the main thing they keep referencing. And this is the payoff to the question we started with. The strongest evidence in this interview is not that the Fever are preparing to dump Stephanie White. It is not that some hidden locker room rebellion is forming. It is almost the opposite. The players speaking here appear to be circling around White because they believe she is part of the culture they are building. Boston says they love and appreciate her. Mitchell says seeing White feel unwanted hurt her personally. Mitchell describes a staff that trusts her defensively. Boston describes defensive improvement. They praise assistance. They praise one another. They describe chemistry as genuine. That is a significant internal vote of confidence, but it still does not erase the external vote of no confidence coming from some fans. And that is why this story is not over. If Indiana keeps winning and the players keep developing, public anger could eventually cool, because winning changes almost every conversation in professional sports. If the team underperforms, however, these same moments of support will be revisited, and people will ask whether loyalty caused the organization to overlook legitimate coaching problems. That is the pressure now sitting on Stephanie White. She has something many embattled coaches lose first: the visible support of important players. What she has not fully recovered is the support of every section of the fan base. Those are two different constituencies, and a successful head coach eventually has to answer to both through results. So force yourself to choose. If Kelsey Mitchell, Aliyah Boston, Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham and other players believe Stephanie White is the right coach for this group, should fans back off and give the team room to build? Or do the fans have every right to keep booing until White proves, through both decisions and results, that their criticism was wrong? Drop your choice in the comments, like the video if you want more breakdowns without the easy narratives, and subscribe because this Fever story is nowhere close to finished.